Our story begins just hours after yet another one of the many confrontations Anakin had endured with Count Dooku since the war began on Geonosis. Not long before that, Anakin had discovered something that left a deeper scar than any lightsaber duel ever could. Obi-Wan Kenobi, his mentor, his brother, had faked his death to slip behind enemy lines, and it had worked. The mission had been a success, but to Anakin it felt like betrayal. He couldn't wrap his mind around why the Council would keep such a thing from him. When Obi-Wan tried to explain, he said it was all necessary to protect the illusion, to preserve the lie. If even Anakin had known the truth, the ruse might have unraveled. The bounty hunters the Separatists had hired needed to believe that Obi-Wan was dead, completely and utterly, and Anakin's reaction, his pain, his heartbreak, had sold the deception better than anything else. But Anakin's soul had been caught in the whirlwind. He didn't speak to anyone for hours afterward. He just shut down, retreated inward. But when the silence gave way to fury, the storm inside him broke loose. He came dangerously close to killing Obi-Wan in the heat of that moment. And when the anger subsided, what remained was the truth. Obi-Wan had been alive the entire time, and he had hidden it from him. Was Anakin relieved to know that Obi-Wan lived? Of course, but that relief was tangled in hurt. Years of trust, of brotherhood, now tainted. Anakin wanted to blame the Council. He always wanted to blame them, but this felt different. This felt personal. This felt like Obi-Wan's decision first. The Council had only stood behind it. That night, Anakin couldn't sleep. He paced alone in his small makeshift room on Naboo. Padma was there too. But she was asleep, unaware of the weight pressing down on him. Their room was nestled within the politician's building, not far from the palace. Most of the Jedi had returned to Coruscant already, but Palpatine was still here, and that was reason enough for Anakin to stay. He stepped out onto the balcony, letting the night air breathe against his skin. Below him, the city streets lay in stillness, peaceful, quiet, oblivious. But inside his mind, chaos roared. His thoughts churned like shadows in a storm. He lowered himself into the balcony chair, leaned forward against the cold railing, and stared down at the lights that traced the street's curve. His eyes wandered back and forth. So did his thoughts, repeating, circling, wearing grooves into his soul. The disbelief was deep, almost unconscious, gnawing at him in a relentless loop. He kept coming back to the same pain. Obi-Wan lied to him, not just anyone. Obi-Wan, his teacher, his friend, his family. He thought about what Palpatine had said to him inside the palace earlier. The Chancellor had congratulated him, praised how successful the plan had been, how brilliant it was to fake Kenobi's death to trap the Separatist conspirators. But Anakin had told him the truth. He hadn't been in on the joke. The flattery meant nothing. Still, maybe he was overanalyzing. Maybe it wasn't that deep. Maybe he was letting emotion cloud his reason. But then the darker thoughts crept in again. He remembered all the criminals he'd brought before the Council only for them to disappear, as if swallowed by the galaxy itself. He remembered all the suffocating moments inside the Jedi Temple, the loneliness, the judgment, the silence. His heart suddenly seized with pain, real, physical pain. It hit him like a jolt of lightning to the chest. He lost his balance, missed the edge of the chair, and collapsed to the floor. His breath came in ragged bursts, his chest rising and falling too fast, too hard. He closed his eyes, his body trembling under the weight of it all. A panic attack, violent, raw, and unstoppable, and with it came a thought so dark, so dangerous that it could change everything. A thought born not from rage, but from despair. He held onto it, clutching it like a lifeline even as his body shook. He pressed his hand against his chest, trying to ground himself. His heart felt like it was racing 1,000,000 miles an hour. He curled himself up between the railing and the side of the building, a tiny cocoon of flesh and fear. He considered waking Padme. She would have helped him. She would have stayed up with him without hesitation. But in his state of mind, he couldn't see that truth clearly. He dismissed it. He tried shaking off the sensation, literally shaking his head, but the panic clung to him like static. A skin-deep itch he couldn't reach. Finally, he breathed deep and tilted his head back, looking up into the stars. And for a moment, a strange calm settled over him. A chill too, but not a cold one. He wrapped his arms around himself, gently, comforting the child within the warrior. And that dangerous thought, it stayed, and now it sat at the front of his mind, whispering like a prophecy. It scared him, but it also made sense. He decided that in the morning he'd confront it. Let the idea breathe in the light. And when the sun finally rose and it came time to head back to Coruscant, Anakin knew exactly who he could talk to. The only person he still trusted to offer any sort of real clarity, Palpatine. But even so, Anakin wasn't ready to say it out loud. Not the whole thing, not yet. The day played out slowly. Palpatine had a speech to give. Then came brunch with the Queen and a handful of senators. Padme said her goodbyes. She wouldn't be returning to Coruscant just yet, and Anakin joined the Chancellor's escort. It was on that vessel, with the stars humming just beyond the hull, that Anakin began asking questions. Not the kind Palpatine had expected. Anakin asked him, "How did you gain so much support? Was it your voice, your speeches, your charisma? Or was it your vision, your structure, your strategy? How did you step away from what was already built and forge something new? And how did you handle resistance?" Palpatine was caught off guard. The questions were thoughtful, searching, political, and they weren't typical of Anakin. Usually their conversations were personal, even warm. This was different, and it made Palpatine wonder, was Anakin thinking about politics? He teased the idea, reminded Anakin that Tatooine had no representation in the Senate. Maybe Anakin could change that. But Anakin brushed it off, twisting the truth slightly. Not a lie, but not the full truth either. Just curiosity, he said. But it wasn't just curiosity. The way he asked those questions, it was like a child pressing a parent for answers they desperately want to understand. And Palpatine, in most cases, did have those answers. When Anakin returned to the temple, Ahsoka was waiting. She had learned about Obi-Wan's deception and was just as unsettled. But more than that, she wanted to understand her master. She wanted to know what it had done to him. They returned to Anakin's quarters to talk. Ahsoka sat at the desk. Anakin perched on his bed. He began slowly, told her he'd been thinking a lot about the Jedi Order, not with hatred, but with deep, heavy disappointment. He told her he didn't resent the Jedi, but at the same time, he did. Did that make sense? No, not really. He tried again. He didn't hate the Jedi for what they were supposed to be, but for what they'd become. Sat back, waiting, knowing there was more. She could feel it. There was something else in the air, something big. And then Anakin took a long breath. He steadied the storm inside him, and he said it. He believed the Jedi Order needed a fracture, a rift, a disruption from within, something to shake it out of its decay. Ahsoka was stunned. Did he just suggest breaking the Jedi apart? That couldn't possibly work, could it? She asked if he was even thinking clearly when he came up with this. He nodded, yes. He'd thought it through. And now, he wanted her opinion not to stop him, but to help him shape it. She dropped her eyes to the floor, thoughts racing. And then she asked him, simply, honestly, what was he really trying to achieve? Anakin paused, and then he told her he wanted to bring the Jedi back to what they claimed to be, but no longer were. He said they were supposed to be warriors, but had become peacekeepers. They were supposed to be marshals, but now they were knights. They were supposed to be seekers of truth, but they had become liars. They were meant to rise above politics, but had become politicians. Ahsoka listened, and then she told him, if that's truly how he saw the Jedi, then maybe he should speak those truths. Say them out loud. Let the Order hear what he had to say. Anakin knew he had a voice that carried. He was a face known across the galaxy. The poster child of the Republic war effort. The chosen one. Every Jedi knew who he was. But this was different. This was something else entirely. He was scared, not of battle, not of dying, but of what this could cost him. He thanked Ahsoka. She nodded, silently, and left. Anakin lay back on his bed, turned on a soft mix of music and nature sounds, closed his eyes and started to speak to himself. Slowly, methodically, he took that wild, frightening idea and shaped it into something structured, something whole. He didn't need to write it down. It burned itself into his mind, and then, deep in the night, he rose. He was ready. He left his quarters and made his way through the temple toward the archives. The halls were empty, silent, as if the Force itself was holding its breath. He reached the archive chamber, approached the holodrives, and opened the system. He would record a message, one that every Jedi in the galaxy would receive, all at once. His hands trembled slightly as he pressed the keys. A triple beep sounded. He inhaled, and then he began to speak. This is Anakin Skywalker, Jedi Knight inside the Jedi Order and General inside the Grand Army of the Republic. Anakin stood there, alone in the archives, the cold glow of the console bathing his face in light. He steadied himself and began, I have come to tell you all that the Council has lied to us, and it's time for them to renounce their rule over the Order. During my time as a Jedi, I've seen great change, and as many of you who learned the same lessons as I, we have come to realize that this Order is a shell of what it once was a long time ago, before any of us were alive. We, as Jedi, are meant to be peacekeepers, and yet we sustain the war. We are meant to be liberators. Yet, the crime families rule over the Outer Rim. We are meant to be knights of the Republic, and yet we hold nothing but militaristic titles, and send our Padawans off into the clutches of the war. I'm not suggesting we surrender to the Separatists, but I am suggesting that the Jedi Council step down from their seats over the Order. Many on the Council are influenced by a complacent Grand Master, and many of us simply accept the lies that are being told to us by the Council. I believe we can change the outcome of our own history, as long as we have the courage to believe. Too. Those of you that wish to join me in our historic endeavor, may the Force be with us. Anakin's finger hovered for just a moment, and then he tapped the button on the console. The message ended. He took a breath. Not just a breath, but one deep enough to reach the weight in his chest. The system began loading the message. The hallway outside the archives was dim and empty, still lost in the peace of night. but Anakin felt something stirring within him, a surreal calm. A strange peace covered his body, like a soft blanket after a storm. Maybe, just maybe, he'd saved the Jedi from their own collapse. Or maybe he'd only hastened their fall. He stumbled slightly over the weight of that thought, his mind catching on something he forgot. He forgot to say something. The one thing he'd planned to say. He'd known this would happen. It had been a quiet wager he made with himself on the way over, and he'd lost. Still, at the very least, the message was coherent. It spoke for itself. Hopefully, they'd understand. A short minute passed. The message finished processing, and then it was sent across the entire galaxy. Every Jedi, everywhere, would receive it. Anakin stepped back, moving for the exit. He wasn't technically supposed to be here, but at this point, what did that even matter? As he made his way back toward his room, something dawned on him, something chilling. He hadn't just sent it to personal comms. He'd accidentally broadcast it to every system in the Order. That included the temple's public speakers, the ones used for announcements. They'd hear it. All of them, in the middle of the night. His eyes widened. Anakin spun around and dashed back into the archives, heart hammering. He couldn't let this become a disturbance. If he awoke the temple, he could lose allies before they even listened. He didn't want superstition to ruin what might have been real support. He quieted the system just in time. Then he made his way back to his quarters, trying to settle the nerves again. Part of him wanted to stay up and watch the sun rise. Another part of him couldn't keep his eyes open. He was exhausted. Sleep claimed him slowly, but deeply. Morning came, golden light creeping through the high windows. Anakin barely remembered the night before. Not until a sharp knock came at the door. Groggy, Anakin told them to come in. It was Obi-Wan, and he did not look pleased. Anakin asked him what was wrong, still trying to blink the sleep out of his eyes. Obi-Wan didn't answer at first. He just held up a holopad and pressed play. The transmission played. Anakin's voice echoed in the room. Clear and forceful. Anakin's stomach sank as the memory came rushing back. He sat up, looking between Obi-Wan and the message. He steadied himself. He told Obi-Wan that it was how he truly felt. He tried to say it with confidence, that there was real corruption, and that the council should step down. Obi-Wan looked disappointed. He told Anakin that there was still time to walk it back. It was early. Many Jedi hadn't heard it yet. If he rescinded the message now, maybe. Anakin swung his legs over the bed. He shook his head. He pulled his sleeve over his metallic arm and arranged the folds of his robes. Then he looked Obi-Wan in the eye. It's time for change. Obi-Wan stepped forward, voice grave. This won't end the way you want it to. Anakin's face hardened. He pointed at Obi-Wan. Then maybe you shouldn't have breached our trust. He lowered his hand, breath catching in his chest. He spoke again, quieter. I'm glad you're alive. I really am. But that doesn't mean I forgive you. What you and the council did. I can't just look past that. You should be appalled. Obi-Wan said it had been to protect the Chancellor. Anakin fired back. And what did all that lying accomplish? Dooku wasn't captured. The bounty hunters, they'll escape again. Nothing's changed. Give it a few months and everything will be back to the way it was. The war will still go on. Anakin stepped out into the hallway. The temple was stirring to life. A cum came through. He was being summoned to the High Council chambers. He took a deep breath and headed for the elevator. Obi-Wan was there too, waiting in silence beside him. When the doors opened, they entered the chamber. Obi-Wan sat down in his usual place. Anakin stood alone. The full council was present. Many of them were awake already and had seen the message. The Grand Master and the Master of the Order waited silently for a moment. Then Yoda spoke, disappointment thick in his voice. He told Anakin that his actions would only bring division to the Order. Anakin looked back, steady and bold. Maybe that's what the Order needs. Maybe division will force the Council to see what they've become. From across the chamber, Ki-Adi-Mundi rose from his seat. What exactly is so wrong with what the Jedi are doing? Anakin turned to him. It's in the message. You all heard it. Ki-Adi didn't like that answer. Mace Windu leaned forward. What's the purpose of all this? Anakin sighed. I'm tired of being lied to. I'm tired of being a Jedi, but not being a Jedi. Plo Koon asked him what he meant. Anakin looked him in the eye. I was on a mission to Zajaria. There were slavers there. I grew up a slave. On Tatooine, why hasn't anything changed? I've been in the Order for nearly 12 years, and it's all the same. He paused. This war. It's pulled the Jedi further away from the code we pretend to uphold. How can I follow that code when we can't even keep the peace? Yoda replied gently. Not the first war, this is the Jedi. Not omnipresent, we are. Anakin's jaw clenched. Then why act like it? Why pick a side at all? Windu shot back. Wasn't it you and the senator from Naboo who got captured on Geonosis? Obi-Wan cut in his, said Anakin was going too far. That this had been a lesson, he should have taken it as a trial in patience. In letting go, Yoda lifted his hand. The room quieted. He told Anakin that his actions could be reversed if he sent another message, apologizing to the Order. He would still face consequences, but at least he could make amends. Anakin shook his head. Then Ki-Adi-Mundi stood up. Then, you are no longer welcome in the Jedi Order. The words hung in the air like a blade. Anakin didn't flinch. He turned slowly, meeting the stares of the other masters. He held his ground. You think I've brought disgrace? I only asked that. You step aside, so a new generation could lead the Order. But if you can't even see how your actions are tearing it apart, then there's no saving the Jedi. Anakin turned and walked out. Ki-Adi. Mundi called after the room. Are there any others who feel the same? Silence. Then Master Plo Koon stood. He looked at his fellow masters and said it clearly. The Council had failed its mandate. The code wasn't being followed. The Jedi had become warmongers. From the corner of the chamber, 2 more stood. Eth Koth, Dipper Bilabar. They said they agreed. Dipper spoke gently. Wasn't all black and white, she said. But Anakin was right. The cracks were real. The Order was unraveling. On the other side of the room, Odigalia, Kit Fisto, and Shock T rose. They agreed as well. Not everything had been under their control, but their own hypocrisy had only grown since the Clone Wars began. They'd clung too closely to the Republic and relied too much on its leaders. Plo moved toward the door and waited for the others. Before leaving, he looked back. Maybe Master Sifo-Dyas had a point, and while Dooku went too far, maybe he was ahead of his time. The Jedi should have changed when Dooku left. When Yaddle stepped down, the 6 Jedi left the chamber. Silence blanketed what remained of the Council. They descended in the elevator together, quietly. At the bottom, one of them asked, "What?" Now Plo said it depended. If the Order stood with them real, change could happen. But if the Order clung to the old ways, it would fall back upstairs. The council began to argue. Oppo-Rancisis wanted to expel all who didn't stand with the council. Mace thought that would only fuel the fracture. The Sith could use this. Obi-1 said to let it rest. Anakin's words wouldn't create a true uprising. Not yet, Kiadi agreed, sneering. Skywalker's always been volatile. Obi-Wan said nothing, but inside, he didn't agree. He didn't like what Anakin had done, but the deception had been his choice. He'd meant no harm. When the elevator doors opened, the 6 Jedi stepped out. There, waiting for the mannequin. Surrounded by a gathering of Jedi, Ahsoka stood at his side. Many had seen the message. Many agreed with it. Jedi across the galaxy had watched it. Some were unsure what to do. But here now, they came. They found Anakin, surrounded him, asked him what had happened, what would happen next. He was shocked. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't realized how many others had felt what he did. They didn't want to follow Dooku, but Anakin's voice, his message, it had been calm, clear. It had opened a conversation Dooku never could, and now they wanted to join him. Even though the council had cast him out, they didn't want him to go. He was the face of the Republic. The Jedi couldn't afford to lose him. Anakin felt something close to peace, admiration, a quiet strength. And then the doors behind him opened again. The 6 Jedi stepped out. He turned, unsure what to expect. Were they here to punish him? Plo Koon stepped forward. Despite some of your motives, we agree with your direction, with your truth. Anakin smiled, not in triumph, but in gratitude. Thank you for believing in me. The former council members stood with him. There's no reason, they said, for you to leave the Jedi Order. Things needed to change within the Jedi Order. Everyone knew it had been teetering on the edge for decades, but now the veil was gone. The truth had been laid bare, and in the quiet that followed, it became clear the Grand Master himself was part of the problem. No one denied that Yoda cared. He was, in many ways, a true Jedi, steadfast, compassionate, endlessly wise. But he had become complacent. He had lived for nearly 900 years, and he had spent more than half of that time as the Grand Master of the Jedi Order. Generations of Jedi had revered him, held him up as the wisest among them, and though he was wise, he wasn't changing anymore. He wasn't evolving. He was simply accepting the status quo, and for the new generation of Jedi, for those who had grown up in a galaxy at war, that was no longer good enough. Plo Koon wasn't part of this younger wave of Jedi, but even he recognized the truth in Anakin's words. He may have been centuries old, but he understood what Anakin was trying to do. Obi-Wan might have seen it too. If he hadn't believed Anakin was simply overreacting. Anakin turned to Plo. What should we do? Plo didn't answer right away. Instead, he placed a calm hand on Anakin's shoulder. The answers you need, he said, have to come from within. It wasn't just guidance. It was something more. Plo was passing the torch. He might have been over 300 years old, but even he knew that this, whatever it would be, called revolution, schism, awakening, had to come from Anakin. If it came from anyone else, it would feel like a ploy, a bid for power. But Anakin, he was the spark. It had to be him. Still, there were plenty who hated Anakin for this, who saw it as a betrayal, who thought he'd gone too far, and maybe he'd crossed lines before. But this was different. The remaining council gathered in private. They whispered about how to control the situation, how to calm the nerves of the Jedi and manage the damage. But as with so many things lately, they just swept it under the carpet, one more skeleton buried in a long line of buried truths. But the cracks were showing now. The systematic flaws in the Jedi Order had been exposed, and it was only a matter of time before that exposure brought the whole thing down. Hours passed since Anakin had been officially removed from the Order, and still the debate raged throughout the temple. The halls were filled with voices, some raised in frustration, others in doubt, others in hope. Some Jedi stood with Anakin. They believed that the Order had lost its way, that something had to change. Others stood firm against it, believing that the Jedi should remain as they were, that the Order had always held true to its purpose. But none of it went beyond talk. Not yet. The tension, however, felt like a battlefield. Anakin remained out of sight. He stayed tucked away, silent, while the council members who had stepped down made it known that they stood with him. They began to voice their belief. Maybe, just maybe, change was finally necessary for the good of all Jedi. The council itself still believed they could weather this, that the Jedi Order would carry on unchanged, that they didn't need to engage their peers or check their loyalty. They assumed that this was just another moment in Anakin's long history of crossing the line, and they figured that, like always, he'd just walk away after being expelled. That assumption wasn't entirely wrong. Anakin wasn't reaching out to anyone. He wasn't trying to start a war. He was sitting alone in his quarters, trying to think, to build, to imagine a better order. If he was the voice of this resistance, then he needed to be clear. He needed to understand, without a shadow of doubt, what he believed, what he stood for. He needed to have every talking point burned into his mind, and in those long hours of solitude, he finally understood why his anxiety had always sat so heavily in his chest. Because this would take everything out of him. This would challenge everything he would need to be stronger than he had ever been before. Days passed, and Anakin stayed isolated, but word spread. People talked, and some began to notice how calm Anakin had remained, how peaceful he had been in all of this. That wasn't what they'd expected. Had he acted the way he usually did, impulsive, aggressive, it all would have crumbled. But he hadn't, and because of that, it was working. The remaining council members reached out to their former peers. They requested private conversations, one by one, hoping to understand why they stepped down. Plo Koon, Adi Gallia, Dipper Bilaba, Kit Fisto, Eth Koth, Shakti. All of them gave different reasons, but the message was the same. The Jedi had fallen too deep, too far down the Sarlacc pit. It was time for real change. The council didn't take that well. It didn't open their eyes. It closed their hearts, made them defensive, hardened. Then, finally, Anakin emerged. He stepped out of his room quietly and walked the halls of the temple. Some greeted him with kindness, others with cold stares. He welcomed both. He had accepted the role he'd given himself, and he would carry it, no matter how heavy. In the Great Hall, a group of Jedi were deep in discussion. Watching from outside, the crowd stood Plo, Shakti, and Kit Fisto. They saw him. They came to him. "How are you doing?" they asked. Anakin paused. "I'm not sure what I've done, but I've thought it through. I know what I want to say now, what we need to accomplish, what has to change." They were proud of him then. Silence. The room quieted as the other Jedi turned. One by one, they stepped aside, opening a path for him. He would have to speak. The entire revolution, this fragile, growing hope rested on his shoulders, on his ability to say the right words, in the right way. Plo could sense his hesitation. He placed an arm around Anakin's back, gently pulled him close, and whispered, "Fate rarely calls upon us at a moment of our choosing. But this path, it's the will of the Force. Let it guide you." Anakin gave a small smile, nodding. Then he stepped forward, but just as he did, his name rang out, sharp and loud. He turned. It was Jedi Master Ki-Adi. He'd left the council chambers, come down from his high perch. And he didn't waste time. "Skywalker," he said sternly, "cease this. Leave the Jedi Temple. You are no longer welcome here." Anakin looked around. Some Jedi were still unsure where they stood. Some were leaning toward his side. But Tony's threat pushed them further away from the council. Anakin faced him fully. "Master Mundi, I ask only that you respect me and my peers." Mundi's expression hardened. "If they align themselves with you, they will no longer be considered Jedi, and they will be forcibly removed." That threat changed everything. Those who had remained uncertain now saw the truth. The council was afraid. The council would force obedience. But Anakin wasn't afraid. He shook his head. "That will not happen." Mundi reached for his belt. "This is your final warning," he said. "Take your band of rebels and leave the Jedi Order." Anakin didn't move, and Mundi ignited his lightsaber. Gasps rippled through the hall. Most hadn't expected this to escalate. Anakin remembered Plo's words. He trusted them. He ignited his own blade. The two of them stood across from each other, sabers humming. Then more Jedi rounded the corner council loyalists. They lit their weapons in support of Mundi. They told Anakin he was outmatched. It was time to go. Kit Fisto started to move forward. To stop it, but Plo put a hand on his shoulder and shook his head. "This was escalated by the council," Plo said quietly. "Let that be seen." Anakin stood tall. "I'm not afraid of the odds." It may have sounded arrogant, but it came from a place of purpose. The Jedi who stood with him ignited their blades too. "This doesn't have to go this way," Anakin said. From across the upper level, Master Oppo Rancisis spoke up. He blamed Anakin for all of this, and he too ignited his blade. More loyalists followed suit. Anakin now stood between two council masters, surrounded. Most of the Jedi he was about to address had also activated their weapons. Some had joined him fully. Others had been pushed to his side by the council's aggression. The few that still backed the council now found themselves surrounded. Fisto, Shaak Ti, and Plo finally lit their sabers too, but they didn't advance. Not yet. They hoped, prayed that Anakin could still defuse it. Anakin pointed his saber forward. "You escalated this," he told them, but they didn't hear it that way. Mundi responded coldly, "Your final warning has expired." Then he charged. Anakin barely had time to react, spinning out of the way as Mundi's blade came crashing down. Then it erupted. The others moved. Blades ignited. Feet slammed into the floor. Some Jedi were holding back. They didn't want to hurt anyone, but others, they were going for the kill. Anakin twisted, blocking a strike from Rancisis. Mundi turned back, but was hurled across the floor by the Force. Plo ducked under a strike, turned, and locked blades with another Jedi. Anakin was blocking blow after blow. It was chaos. Then silence. A body hit the ground. Everyone stopped. A young Jedi Knight screamed. His master lay dead. She had supported Anakin, and the Jedi who killed her had supported the council. The knight howled in grief and rage, then drove his saber up through the jaw of his master's killer. The war resumed. Sabers clashed. Jedi fought Jedi. Anakin tried to fight defensively. He tried not to harm, but it was no longer possible. A Jedi rushed him. He had no choice. Anakin severed their arm. He turned back to Rancisis. Nearby, Plo and Mundi were locked in combat. Plo didn't want this, but in that moment, he saw the council clearly. It lived in Mundi, in Rancisis, in their unbending dogma. Anakin saw it too. He didn't want to hurt Oppo, but he was given no choice. Rancisis was fast, skilled as Jedi fell around them. Anakin finally broke through, disarming Rancisis and cutting off both his hands. Then he hurled him with the Force, smashing him into a Pijadan. Anakin. He turned. Dobby. OB-1 stood there. Ahsoka ran to Anakin's side. Kenobi looked around the room shocked. The halls echoed with the sounds of violence. He looked at Anakin. This has to stop. For a moment, it felt like stillness. The eye of the storm, Anakin spoke, voice heavy with sorrow. It didn't have to come to this. Obi-Wan couldn't. Believe it. All he saw was the aftermath. All he saw was Anakin standing over Rancisis, bloodied and broken. He hadn't seen what Mundi had done, and in that blind spot, the war within the Jedi raged on. He wasn't exactly convinced that a council member would be the one to start such a fight. But here they were. Anakin turned to his former master, standing firm, and told him he wasn't backing down, not when he knew in his heart what was right. He raised his lightsaber into his signature stance, and Obi-Wan, steady and resolved, ignited his own. They looked at one another for a long, silent moment. Brothers. And then Anakin turned to Ahsoka. Go, he said gently. This is our fight. He didn't want to hurt Obi-Wan. Not truly. He knew this wasn't his fault. Not really. Obi-Wan still trusted the will of the council, and Anakin. Anakin didn't want to believe he had lost his best friend to them, but the fight began. Anakin and Obi-Wan rushed at each other, sabers crashing together in a thunderous spark that echoed through the temple. Elsewhere, the clashes only grew more intense. Council members converged on one another. Kit Fisto de Pavillava and Adi Gallia came face to face with Mace Windu's squad, though Windu himself wasn't there yet. It was again Kola and CC-10. Fisto knew these duelists. He respected them, but this wouldn't be easy. At the same time, Shakti had joined Plo Koon in his brutal duel against Ki-Adi-Mundi. It was quickly becoming clear Mundi wouldn't stop. He had chosen this path. Then, the Master of the Order and the Grand Master arrived. Windu, Yoda. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Like Obi-Wan, they assumed Anakin had started this. They scanned the battle, looking for him. But before they could reach him, Jedi loyal to Anakin stepped forward. Their sabers ignited, intercepting the Masters. Windu and Yoda were forced to defend themselves. Meanwhile, Anakin and Obi-Wan was something to behold. Even through the chaos, Jedi paused to watch the duel. Years of brotherhood laid bare in every clash. Every motion held the weight of memory. Anakin wasn't angry. He wasn't drawing on rage. He was composed, focused, and desperately trying to hold everything together before it shattered. Their blades danced. Neither gained the upper hand. Elsewhere, Barriss and Ahsoka crossed paths just after Barriss struck down Luminara. She couldn't stand her master anymore. Ahsoka tried to avoid killing, but some Jedi, they weren't holding back. Across the catwalk, Plo met another strike from Mundi, then countered his blade, slashing forward, cutting through Mundi's chest. It was over. Plo held out his hand as Kiadi fell, and Shakti placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. She was right. This was Mundi's choice. He had made it happen. They had been close for years, but it didn't matter now. Mundi started this. His death was his penance. But before they could process what had just happened, a flash of purple filled the hall Mace Windu. He looked at them with disappointment, shame in his voice. You betrayed the Jedi Order, but they disagreed. They hadn't betrayed anything. They were protecting what little remained. And without another word, the duel began. Yoda moved through the battlefield dispatching sabers, trying to stop the fighting with calm, swift precision. But then he reached Kit Fisto, Adi Gallia, Dipabilaba, and Ethkoth. They had already disarmed again Kola and CC-10 without killing them, and now they confronted Yoda himself, hoping they could stop him before he made things worse. Anakin and Obi-Wan's duel grew more fierce. They clashed over and over, their hands locking, pulling each other close in a blur of emotion and motion. But despite Obi-Wan's mastery of Form 3, Anakin finally found his edge. He slashed upward, breaking Obi-Wan's balance, then, not to harm him, kicked him in the stomach. Sending him to the ground, Anakin stood over him, lightsaber in hand, but didn't strike. I never wanted to hurt you, he said quietly. I just hope you can see what your loyalty to the Council has done. Leaving Obi-Wan where he lay, Anakin raced through the temple, searching for where he could help. The battle was raging, bodies of fallen Jedi everywhere. He found Mace Windu. Dueling both Plo Koon and Shakti, it was a fierce and desperate clash. Windu was a master duelist. Anakin thought they might be able to hold their own, until he saw Yoda, the Grand Master, stood, lightsaber ignited, his expression unreadable but deeply displeased. He looked at Anakin. You made a mistake, he said. And then Yoda fought. He fought hard. He defeated all four, Jedi Plo, Shakti, Fisto, and even Adi Gallia. It took everything he had, but he did it. When it was done, he stood before Anakin, and then something began to change. Behind Anakin, Jedi began to line up knights, Padawans, masters, his revolutionists, his allies. They came to his side, silently. Anakin didn't need to look. He could feel them. He faced Yoda and Windu. It's time, he said. Time to stand down. Time to surrender your seats. For the future of the Jedi. Plo and Shakti stepped forward again, sabers raised in defense. Yoda and Windu stood back to back, preparing for whatever would come next. Obi-Wan, still on the ground, watched Ahsoka move to Anakin's side. He looked around at the carnage, thought about all of it. Maybe Anakin hadn't started this. Right now he didn't look like someone desperate for power. He looked heartbroken. He looked like someone disappointed it had come to this. Silence fell over the hall. Only a few duels still burned in the corners. Anakin broke the silence. He looked at the Grand Master and the Master of the Order. All of this death, it was never what I wanted. I came here to talk, to make my case, to propose change, a future, and Ki-Adi-Mundi. He threatened me. I only drew my weapon to defend myself, but the Council, loyalists, they wanted a battle, and now hundreds are dead. His voice trembled slightly. It didn't have to end like this. It doesn't have to continue. Yoda raised his saber. Your revolution caused this. Your need to disturb the order caused this. Anakin shook his head and deactivated his lightsaber. He didn't want to be a martyr, but he knew what had to happen now. He looked at Ahsoka and placed his lightsaber in her hands. "What are you doing?" she asked, but he stepped forward, alone, into the center of the hall. The Jedi behind him watched in stunned silence as Anakin Skywalker dropped to his knees. And he looked up at Yoda. "You have two choices," he said. "Kill me and restore your Jedi Order, or step down and help restore the true Jedi Order." If Yoda killed him, the loyalists might rise up in anger. But if he surrendered, he would give the future to the others. Yoda didn't want a schism. He didn't want the Order torn in two. He looked at Skywalker, and then extinguished his weapon. "No more death," he said. He turned to the other Jedi. "It was my failure that led us this far from the path." And then he walked away, defeated. Windu watched Yoda go and said nothing. The Jedi slowly began to look around, confusion written on their faces. The fighting stopped. Anakin looked up. A wave of shock passed through him. He had surrendered himself to death, and the Force gave him peace. Euphoria. What now? He had never thought he'd get this far. What now? He turned around, saw the Jedi behind him, their lightsabers deactivating. Was that it? Was the Jedi Civil War over? He stood, looking at the carnage, shock rising inside him. He looked to the Jedi. "We can only begin a new era," he said. "If we come together, we must become whole, before we can fix what's broken." Now that the rupture had ended, the healing could begin. Anakin looked over to Obi-Wan, still on the floor, and moved to him. "You all right?" he asked gently. Obi-Wan nodded, but said nothing. In the hours that followed, every fallen Jedi was taken to the morgue. They were honored together, buried in a single, vast ceremony of remembrance. Yoda vanished like a ghost, his presence gone. Windu, however, stayed. He helped clean the temple, helped bury the dead. The hours turned into days. Many Jedi struggled to make sense of what had happened, how to explain it, how to live with it. It had been horrific. Jedi against Jedi, and somewhere, the Sith Lord surely knew. The Chancellor, maybe not. Anakin didn't want the title of Grand Master, but there was no other role left for him now. He had ripped apart the Order, declared the Council unfit to govern. It turned one. Now he had two. Make it better. He had to prove it could be better. But that left him in a difficult place. He was loyal to his men, deeply. But the war itself, it went against everything the Jedi were supposed to stand for. If he continued to lead the war, he'd be a hypocrite, a liar, and eventually, it would all collapse. Anakin had never liked politics, so that's where he started. When the funeral rites were done, he approached Jocasta anew. She had stood with the council, but she was still the archivist. She still had to help him. Anakin asked her for knowledge, for everything he could learn about the history of the Jedi. The Order had lasted for 25,000 years, surely. Something in the past could guide the future. He read about another civil war, about other eras of Jedi history, about how they'd worked, with or without the Republic, and what they were doing now. It was the most toxic relationship of all. The Jedi weren't fighting the Sith anymore. They were fighting people that couldn't continue. So Anakin stood before the Jedi Order and made a declaration. They would remove themselves from the war. They would relinquish their roles as generals, commanders, everything. They would separate entirely from the Republic. Their new goal was peace. and from that neutral stance, they had access to both sides. At first, the separatists didn't trust it, but it worked. No one was more stunned than Palpatine. He hadn't imagined this. He never thought Yoda would step down. He never thought Anakin would become Grand Master. Now, his future apprentice wasn't just a Jedi. He was the Jedi. Every Jedi looked up to him now. Palpatine had a problem. Anakin's message rippled across the galaxy. The Jedi severed their ancient bond with the Republic, but Anakin explained why. They were not here to serve a government. They were here to serve everyone. That would be their mission now. Peace across the galaxy. The response was mostly positive. Some in the Republic didn't like it. Some separatists didn't trust it. But most understood. Anakin didn't rebuild a council. He didn't want all the weight. Instead, he asked for help, gave certain masters tasks, sent some to rebuild the image of the Jedi. Others were sent to different worlds. Carrying out the vision, Anakin continued his deep dive into the Jedi archives. No longer a general, he didn't have to leave Coruscant. Besides, his old master the Negotiator was out in the galaxy, doing the talking. The Jedi pursuing possessedly on Raxusware, Obi-Wan, Kit Fisto, Shakti, and Plo Koon. This renouncing of the Republic meant that the Jedi, including Anakin, had no business being at the Republic Executive Building or the Senate Chamber without stated approval from a number of senators. Fortunately, there were still plenty of senators who remained friendly with the Jedi. That connection gave Windu, Dipper Bilaba, and Adi Gallia the access they needed to remain inside the Senate, relaying vital information back to the Jedi stationed on Raxus. While all of this played out on Coruscant and Raxus, something else stirred in the Outer Rim. With the Jedi no longer involved in the hunt for Maul, he had seized his opening. He captured Hondo Onoka's crew and bent them to his will, claiming them as his own. Hondo barely escaped with his life, but Maul, unaware of Mandalore's weaknesses without deeper intelligence, believed he could now begin building his own criminal empire, starting with a ragtag force of pirates across the galaxy. People began to see just how crucial the Jedi had been to the front lines of the war. The Republic started losing battles it once would have easily won. Not every engagement, no, but enough to be noticed. The Jedi weren't invincible, they weren't superheroes, but they were deeply missed by the clones. Having a Jedi nearby had always made a difference on the battlefield, and now, without them, things were harder. The clones felt it. The loss, amidst all this. Anakin began to reshape the Jedi Code. He saw things in the ancient traditions that no longer made sense, especially when viewed through the lens of how they had originally been framed. His rebellious spirit stirred again, but this time not for himself. For the good of the Order, he began making changes. He allowed access to the restricted section for anyone who had earned the rank of knight. He erased the ban on attachments. He raised the age limit for new initiates into the Order, and he encouraged a broader, more open use of the Force. That rule about the restricted section meant every Jedi, except children, could now study what had once been locked away. Everything the Council had hidden was now accessible to any knight and above. The changes to attachments were simple enough. Anakin no longer believed the Jedi should deny connection, though, even with the change, he didn't reveal his own relationship, not yet. The encouragement to explore the Force didn't mean embracing the dark side. Anakin believed, as Qui-Gon had, that the light should be followed simply because it was there. Still, with some inspiration drawn from Windu's teachings. Anakin allowed the idea that using parts of the dark side, especially in meditation, could serve as a tool, not a path. A tool. Anakin himself had once fallen deep into the dark, but now, as Grand Master, he saw these additions to the code not as indulgence, but as a way to grow, a way to heal, a way to improve as a Jedi. Since beginning this revolution, he'd been forced to grow up. The tantrums, the angry outbursts, they had no place anymore. Through these changes, Anakin hoped to evolve, both as a Jedi and as a man, with the Jedi now spotlighted in the peace talks. The pressure began to shift, landing on the Separatist Senate, the Republic Senate, Count Dooku, and Chancellor Palpatine. This wasn't part of their grand design, and it was quickly becoming one of the many unexpected threats that could unravel everything they'd planned, because, it turned out, people didn't like death. A galaxy-wide war had sown disunity, but now, thanks to the Jedi, unity had a chance to bloom. Palpatine knew it, Dooku knew it, and both understood this new trajectory could dismantle their entire plan. If they didn't find a way to fix it, the Jedi would win. Not just in battle, but in ideology. They needed to make it seem like peace itself was unrealistic. It wasn't the first time the Republic had brushed against peace. Last time, General Grievous had stopped it. So now Dooku decided to send Grievous to Raxus, with one objective: kill the 4 Jedi stationed there. But it didn't work. Grievous was powerful, but not powerful enough. He had already lost two of these Jedi before, and now, with 2 more elite Jedi standing beside them, he didn't stand a chance. He was destroyed. Afterward, the Jedi proposed to the Separatists that there must be someone else, someone hidden, working against peace. Dooku feigned interest in the talks, but most of the Separatist Senate saw through it. The people wanted peace, and Dooku, he seemed like the problem. It didn't help that the people of Sereno had grown tired of his rule, tired of his exploitation. Palpatine knew the situation was spinning beyond his control, so he tried to pivot. He called upon Anakin, still maintaining a cordial bond with the young Grand Master. Though Anakin no longer had the time or energy to humor it, he was focused, obsessed, even with ending the war and healing the galaxy. Palpatine, trying to sow doubt, suggested that maybe it was the Jedi who were slowing the peace process. After all, he hinted, you haven't been personally involved, have you? But Anakin didn't buy it. He looked Palpatine in the eye and said, all I want is peace. If you're not ready to bring that, maybe someone else should be sitting in your chair. It was bold, blunt, but necessary. Palpatine, ever the manipulator, twisted the encounter. He realized then and there Anakin, as Grand Master, would never fall. He was more Jedi now than ever before, untouchable. So Palpatine tried to smear him. He claimed that, in a private call, Anakin had threatened him, told the Chancellor to step down. It was a political move, designed to create scandal, to distract from the real progress being made in the peace accords. But Anakin saw through it. He knew it was all politics, smoke and mirrors, so he turned to an unlikely ally, Mace Windu. The two weren't close, not really. But after the Civil War, they'd managed to restore a kind of mutual understanding. They weren't friends, but they kept the peace between themselves. Anakin believed Windu, once Master of the Order, might know how to handle Palpatine's accusation. Windu's advice was simple: stay the course. That was all he had to say. Actions would speak louder than rumors. If Palpatine truly intended to bring the Jedi down, He was only revealing himself for the fraud he truly was. Anakin thanked Windu, then asked quietly, "Have you seen Yoda?" Windu shook his head. "No," he said. "He's probably meditating." But that was far from the truth. They went their separate ways. As the peace treaties neared finalization, battles across the galaxy began to slow. And during this time, Anakin resumed training, Ahsoka helping her grow. She was strong now, independent. Anakin knew she was ready to move beyond the role of Padawan. When the war ended, he would see her off with pride. Through it all, Anakin stayed close with Padma. He admitted to her that he'd changed the code, but felt the weight of it on his shoulders. He worried he'd taken on too much. She reminded him gently that he always held himself to impossible standards. She told him he was strong, but only human. Not to lose himself in the burden of leadership. Anakin took her words to heart and returned to the diplomacy. Palpatine, watching all of this unfold, knew his options were limited. Order 66 wouldn't work. Jedi were on high alert. The clones were no longer embedded with them. Any such move would expose him. He needed something else. So he turned to Dooku, and together they agreed. They would retreat to Maraband. The war would end, and Sereno would almost certainly remove Dooku from power. But the Sith had to survive. Always Palpatine's grand design had failed, but he would devise another. Somehow, and so, thanks to the Jedi, the Clone Wars ended. Some separatists couldn't accept peace. They chose violence. Every last one of them died. Meanwhile, the Jedi returned to the temple to mourn one of their own. Yoda had passed away in his sleep. The truth was, he had never recovered from the pain. For so long, he had believed he was preserving the legacy of the Jedi, but, in reality, he had only led them astray. That burden crushed him. He never recovered. He died with regret, but no resentment. Before his death, he had recorded a final message for Anakin. Anakin didn't see it until after the funeral. It broke him. He took the holo-recording to his chamber and listened. Yoda spoke of his life and his greatest failures. The fall of the Jedi, the loss of Dooku. He confessed them all not to be mourned, but to teach. He told Anakin, failure is the greatest teacher, and that he must pass on everything he learned. Anakin wept, but he also felt renewed, inspired. He vowed not only to be the best Jedi, but the best man he could be. To be a good Jedi meant to be a good person. If one could not be both, they were not truly a Jedi, and so, Jedi must strive to be both and guide others to do the same. Yoda said he believed in Anakin's work with Ahsoka. He believed in him. He ended the message with quiet hope. May the Force be with you. Far away, on Moraban, the Sith gathered. Dooku and Sidious stood inside the black heart of the ancient temple, searching for a path forward, a way to strike the Jedi. Yoda was gone. Talzin too, the avatars of balance had vanished. But Anakin had risen, and the Force had a way of correcting darkness in the years to come. Anakin would grow more powerful than Sidious could imagine. They needed to act quickly. Sidious knew, corrupting. Anakin now was nearly impossible. He was anchored in the Jedi, married to Padme, surrounded by allies. They needed to shatter that anchor. Dooku proposed a dark idea. Kidnap Padme. Maybe even kill her. Sidious liked the thought until he heard footsteps. They turned. A lightsaber ignited. Palpatine screamed. A blade surged forward, searing through his eyes. He was left blind. Dooku ignited his weapon, bracing for battle. The Sith had gathered. But so had their enemies. Maul and Savage had tracked Dooku to Moraband. Their only goal, find Sidious, kill him. Without Death Watch, Maul had assembled a small force of pirates. His power base was limited, but his hatred was not. His desire for vengeance burned like a star. With Sidious blind, Maul turned his blade toward Dooku. This was his chance to destroy the master who had taken him from Dathomir, twisted him, broken him, but it wasn't simple. The Force was strong with Sidious. He would not die easily. Twin red blades ignited, twirling in the dark. And then it began. The temple roared with fury as for Sith, Dualdan, inferno of shadow and rage. This was not the same kind of battle that had shattered the Jedi Temple. This was something darker. Savage lunged at Dooku. Maul charged at Sidious. Savage was monstrous, the same brute who once overpowered Plo Koon with a single strike. Dooku had to fight carefully. Maul, though, was more hesitant, more cautious. He was afraid. Decades of torment haunted him as he faced the monster who had shaped his life, but still he fought. Red light pulsed through the interior of the Sith temple as Maul's double-bladed lightsaber crashed violently against Sidious. Twin crimson blades. Sparks danced in the darkness as Maul spun like a storm, never pausing, never hesitating. He was swift, vicious, relentless. Sidious, though blind, was not helpless. He was not without fear, and Maul was filled with it. The Dark Lord fed on. Maul struck with fury, but deep down he knew the truth. His strength wasn't as great as he hoped. He hammered down on his former master, even as just a few meters away. Count Dooku hurled Savage to the side with ease, dodging out of reach. Like a wraith in motion, Dooku saw an opportunity. Lightning tore from his fingertips, lancing into Savage and crippling his charge. Then, without a moment's hesitation, Dooku turned, thrusting his lightsaber straight through Sidious' back. The blow was final. Dooku leapt backward and raised his blade, casting a long shadow in the flickering light. He turned to Maul and Savage, addressing them like allies rather than enemies. He told them there was no need for them to be adversaries. Sidious was gone now. They could join forces. Together, they could bring war to the Jedi and win. Maul, wordless, slashed his blade across Sidious' fallen body, ensuring death had truly come. Then the two brothers turned, staring at Dooku with nothing but disgust. Dooku could feel it. They didn't trust him. They didn't like him. Fair enough. He was confident, nonetheless. Of all the Sith gathered here, the only one he feared was the one he had just killed. With renewed energy, Dooku leapt down between the brothers. He moved like a man decades younger, his agility, his skill with a lightsaber, his command of the Force, it all came alive. Maul and Savage, despite their power, were momentarily caught off guard. Dooku had a plan. He separated them, forcing the brothers into different parts of the temple. Then, with tactical precision, he lured them where he wanted them. Savage was thrown into the air, and Dooku turned his focus to Maul. Their duel was rapid, brutal. Dooku danced with elegance and force, driving Maul into position as Savage came running back to join the fight. Dooku made his move. He shoved Maul back and unleashed lightning at the altar, an altar where Sidious had once poured the darkest of dark energies. The blast set off a violent chain reaction. A wave of blue smoke exploded outward. The temple shuddered. The brothers were thrown violently to the ground, their backs seared by the burst of energy. Dooku didn't wait. He turned and sprinted toward the exit as the temple began to collapse behind him. Ancient stones groaned and fell as he emerged. Outside, Dooku froze. Dozens of flying saucers filled the sky. Pirates. Dooku narrowed his eyes and then saw him. Standing proudly in front of the ships was a man Dooku despised more than almost anyone in the galaxy. Hondo, Ohnaka, behind him. The Sith temple crumbled in fire and stone, and Hondo grinned wide, broadcasting to all his men that the big, nasty, horned guys were nothing but liars. Hondo was proud of his crew, proud of their pirate spirit, and now he figured he'd use that same spirit against someone. He hated Dooku. He hadn't expected to see the Count here, but it didn't matter. He didn't like Dooku either, and there wasn't much of a reward for keeping him alive, so why not kill him? Hondo cackled as he climbed into his saucer, and then fire rained down on Dooku. The Sith Lord tried to defend himself. He fought hard, but there was only so much he could do. Blast after blast struck him until finally he fell. The pirates cheered and soared off, headed home to Florum for a celebration. Back on Coruscant, with the war behind them and the Jedi newly reborn, Anakin made a decision. It was time to rebuild the Jedi Council, but he would not repeat the old ways. This time it would be different. He considered leaving Coruscant altogether, but the planet wasn't the problem. It was the Jedi's old servitude to the Republic that had led them astray, and the true irony, Anakin would never realize that, through all his choices, he had accidentally destroyed the Sith. He was interrupted by someone familiar. Obi-Wan Kenobi. They had remained friendly, but never fully reconciled now. They did. They walked the temple halls together, speaking quietly, catching up. It was a peaceful, even joyful conversation, but it ended unexpectedly. Obi-Wan told Anakin he was proud of all he had done, and that he was leaving the Jedi Order not because of Anakin, but because another life called to him, Anakin's revision. Of the code especially, the change-allowing attachments had stirred something in Obi-Wan, feelings he had long buried, or more truthfully, feelings he had never accepted. Now, he was ready to accept them. Anakin asked where he was going. Obi-Wan smiled. He said he was going to propose a relationship, or maybe propose outright to Satine. They had loved each other once, and now, with nothing in their way, he would act on it. Anakin wished him luck. While some Jedi left the Order to pursue love, others began to build relationships within it. One such pair was Quinlan Vos and Asajj Ventress, unexpected couple, but one that somehow worked. It helped that the Grand Master himself, Anakin Skywalker, was openly married. The Jedi no longer feared judgment for embracing love. Still, many preferred solitude. It was what they knew. Ahsoka, at this point, had earned the title of Jedi Knight. That gave Anakin an idea. He created 5 new councils. 4 would be composed of Jedi Knights interchangeable each year. Council of the Code, Council of the Blade, Council of the Force, Council of the Jedi. Each had its own mantra, its own focus. These groups would shape and influence the Jedi High Council, which would now be a Masters-only body, but no longer would any seat be for life. And the Grand Master, only the 5 councils could choose one. They could also remove one. It was possible, under this new system, for a Grand Master to serve for life, but only if their peers allowed it. A year after the Clone Wars ended, and Padme welcomed twins Luke and Leia before their birth. The couple had agreed, if they had children, they would be allowed to become Jedi. There was no set age. It would happen naturally. During the Civil War, the Jedi Order had fallen to just 7,000 members. But after Anakin's reforms, that number doubled to 14,000. The reason people of all ages could now join NIF, they were force-sensitive in a galaxy of 100 quadrillion centimeters that opened the door for countless gifted beings. Anakin made this change for a reason. Because of Obi-Wan, Kenobi had been a late bloomer. Many were. Some didn't show signs of sensitivity until adolescence or even adulthood, and by then, it used to be too late. Now, it wasn't. The Jedi expanded. A new temple was built on Rhodia. An outpost was established on Megiddo. The Order was no longer inward-looking. Anakin wanted to move forward. Remember the past, yes, preserve it. Learn from it, but don't let it consume you. They kept the relics. They honored the old ways, but they stepped into something new to stay grounded. In the present, every temple and outpost used the same 5-council structure as Coruscant. This meant 14 councils total, all influencing the High Council. It was complex, but it changed everything. Anakin, meanwhile, continued to distance the Jedi from the Republic. Still, he wasn't silent. He advocated for citizens. And when the Outer Rim erupted in war this time against the crime families, the Jedi were ready. Clones marched. Jedi led the Hutts, Zygerians, Pike Syndicate, and Black Suns crumbled within months. Under the guidance of Bail Organa and Padme Amidala, the Republic expanded into the Outer Rim, and with it, the Jedi built a new outpost on Tatooine. There, they ensured slavery would never again take hold of the galaxy. On Mandalore, Obi-Wan's proposal was met with 2 open arms. A kiss. Satine was overjoyed to have him back. He would sit beside her on the throne. With Maul and the criminal empires gone, Pre Vizsla lost support. The children of the Watch faded, and their foundlings were welcomed into Sindari. Satine's new legacy brought Mandalore peace for the next 20 years. Anakin, Padme, and Ahsoka were all there for the wedding. The Mandalorian wedding of the millennium. With the Sith gone and darkness erased, the future looked bright. Shadows would always rise again, but now, with this system, this vision, true darkness would find no home. Anakin made peace with those Jedi he had once clashed with. Luke and Leia were welcomed into the Order. They trained with their father, with a HSOKA. By the time they reached adulthood, the Jedi numbered 24,000 strong. 20 years ago, it would have seemed impossible, but they had done it. A new Jedi Order built, not on dogma, but on peace and justice for every being in the galaxy. And that is our story.